We tend to think of people from other centuries as being less humane than we are. But since the federal government reinstated the death penalty in 1976, states have executed 1,516 people. At last count in January of 2020, there are 2,620 people on death row awaiting execution. Capital punishment is as controversial today as it was in 1860 when the great writer Anton Chekhov wrote this short story called The Bet. I give you the slightly abridged version of The Bet by Russian author Anton Chekhov. It was a dark autumn night. The old banker was walking up and down in his study and remembering how 15 years before he had been given a party one autumn evening. Among other things, they had talked of capital punishment. The majority of the guests disapproved of the death penalty. Some said the death penalty ought to be replaced everywhere by life imprisonment. "I don't agree with you," said their host, the banker. "I have tried neither the death penalty nor imprisonment for life, but the death penalty is more moral and more humane than imprisonment for life. Capital punishment kills a man at once, but lifelong imprisonment kills him slowly. Which executioner is more humane? He who kills you in a few minutes, or he who drags the life out of you over the course of many years?" Among the guests was a young lawyer, a young man of 25. When he was asked his opinion, he said, "The death sentence and the life sentence are equally immoral. But if I had to choose between death and imprisonment for life, I would certainly choose the second. To live anyhow is better than not at all." A lively discussion arose. The banker, who was younger and more nervous in those days, was suddenly carried away by excitement. He struck the table with his fist and shouted at the young man, "It's not true! I bet you 2 million you wouldn't stay in solitary confinement for 5 years. "If you mean that in earnest," said the young man, "I'll take the bet, but I would stay not 5, but 15 years. 15! Done! Cried the banker. "Gentlemen, I stake 2 million. "Agreed. You stake your millions, and I stake my freedom," said the young man. And this wild, senseless bet came to pass. The banker, spoiled and frivolous, with millions beyond his reckoning, was delighted at the bet. At supper he made fun of the young man and said, "Think better of it, young man, while there is still time. To me, 2 million is a trifle, but you are losing 3 or 4 of the best years of your life. I say 3 or 4 because you won't stay any longer. Don't forget either, you unhappy man, that voluntary confinement is a great deal harder than compulsory. The thought that you have the right to step out into liberty at any time will poison your entire existence in prison. I am sorry for you." And now the banker, walking to and fro, remembered all this and asked himself, "What was the object of that bet? What is the good of that man's losing 15 years of his life and me throwing away 2 million? Can it prove that the death penalty is better or worse than life imprisonment? No, no. It was all nonsensical and meaningless. On my part, it was the caprice of a pampered man. On his part, simple greed for money." Then he remembered what had followed that evening. It was decided that the young man should spend the years of his captivity under the strictest supervision in one of the lodges in the banker's garden. It was agreed that for 15 years he should not be free to see human beings, to hear the human voice, or to receive letters or newspapers. He was allowed to have a musical instrument and books, and was allowed to write letters, to drink wine, and to smoke. The agreement provided that the young man would stay there exactly 15 years, beginning from 12 o'clock of November 14th, 1870, and ending at 12 o'clock on November 14th, 1885. The slightest attempt on his part to break the conditions, if only 2 minutes before the end, released the banker from the obligation to pay him the $2 million. For the first year of his confinement, as far as anyone could judge from his brief notes, the prisoner suffered severely from loneliness and depression. The sounds of the piano could be heard continually, day and night, from his lodge. He refused wine and tobacco. In the first year, the books sent to him were principally of a light character. In the second year, the piano was silent in the lodge, and the prisoner asked only for the classics. In the fifth year, music was audible again, and the prisoner asked for wine. Those who watched him through the window said that all that year he spent doing nothing except eating and drinking and lying on the bed, frequently yawning and angrily talking to himself. He did not read books. Sometimes at night he would sit down to write. He would spend hours writing, and in the morning tear up all that he had written. More than once he could be heard crying. In the second half of the sixth year, the prisoner began zealously studying languages, philosophy, and history. He threw himself eagerly into these studies, so much so that the banker had enough to do just to get him the books he ordered. In the course of 4 years, some 600 volumes were procured at his request. Theology and history of religions followed. In the last 2 years of his confinement, the prisoner read an immense quantity of books quite indiscriminately. There were notes in which he demanded at the same time books on chemistry, a manual on medicine, a novel, and some treatise on philosophy or theology. His reading suggested a man swimming in the sea among the wreckage of a ship and trying to save his life by greedily clutching first one spar and then another. The old banker remembered all of this and thought, "Tomorrow at 12 o'clock he will regain his freedom. By our agreement, I ought to pay him 2 million. If I do pay him, it is all over with me. I shall be utterly ruined. Cursed bet," muttered the old man, clutching his head in despair. "Why didn't he die? He is only 40 now. He will take my last penny from me. He will marry. He will enjoy life. He will gamble on the exchange while I look at him with envy like a beggar. No, it is too much. The only means of being saved from bankruptcy and disgrace is the death of that man." It struck 3 o'clock. The banker felt in the darkness for the steps and the door and went into the entry of the lodge. Then he groped his way into a little passage and lighted a match. There was not a soul there. There was a bedstead with no bedding on it, and in the corner there was a dark cast-iron stove. The seals on the door leading to the prisoner's room were intact. When the match went out, the old man, trembling with emotion, peeped through the little window. A candle was burning dimly in the prisoner's room. He was sitting at the table. Nothing could be seen but his back, the hair on his head, and his hands. Open books were lying on the table, on the 2 easy chairs, and on the carpet near the table. 5 minutes passed. At the table, a man unlike ordinary people was sitting motionless. He was a skeleton with skin as tight over his bones, with long curls like a woman's and a shaggy beard. His face was yellow with an earthly tint in it. His cheeks were hollow, his back long and narrow, and the hand on which his shaggy head was propped was thin and delicate, so much so that it was dreadful to look at. His hair was already streaked with silver, and seeing his emaciated, aged-looking face, no one would have believed that he was only 40. He was asleep. In front of his bowed head, there lay on the table a sheet of paper on which there was something written in fine handwriting. "Poor creature," thought the banker. "He's asleep and most likely dreaming of the millions. And I have only to take this half-dead man, throw him on the bed, stifle him a little with a pillow, and the most conscientious expert would find no sign of a violent death. But first, let me read what he has written here. The banker took the page from the table and read as follows. Tomorrow at 12 o'clock, I regain my freedom and the right to associate with other men. But before I leave this room and see the sunshine, I think it necessary to say a few words to you. With a clear conscience, I tell you, as before God, who beholds me, that I despise freedom and life and health and all that in your books is called the good things of the world. For 15 years I have been intently studying earthly life. It is true, I have not seen the earth, nor men, but in your books I have drunk fragrant wine. I have sung songs, I have hunted stags and wild boars in the forest. I have loved women, beautiful as ethereal as clouds created by the magic of your poets and geniuses. Have visited me at night and have whispered in my ear wonderful tales that have set my brain in a whirl. In your books I have climbed to the peaks of Elburz and Mont Blanc, and from there I have seen the sun rise and have watched it at evening flood the sky, the ocean, the mountain tops, with gold and crimson. I have heard the singing of the sirens, the strain of the shepherd's pipes. I have touched the wings of comely devils who flew down to converse with me of God. In your books I have flung myself into the bottomless pit, performed miracles, slain burned towns, preached new religions, conquered whole kingdoms. Your books have given me wisdom. All that the unresting thought of man has created in the ages is compressed in a tiny compass in my brain. I know that I am wiser than all of you. And I despise your books. I despise wisdom and the blessings of the world. It is all worthless, fleeting, illusory, and deceptive, like a mirage. You have lost your reason and taken the wrong path. You have taken lies for truth and hideousness for beauty. I marvel at you who exchange heaven for earth. I don't want to understand you. To prove to you in action how I despise all that you live by, I renounce the 2 million of which I once dreamed, of paradise, and which I now despise. To deprive myself of the right of the money, I shall go out from here 5 hours before the time fixed, and so break the contract. When the banker had read this, he laid the page on the table, kissed the strange man on the head, and went to the lodge, from the lodge, weeping. At no other time, even when he had lost heavily on the stock exchange, had he felt such a great contempt for himself. When he got home, he lay on his bed and tried to sleep, but his tears and emotion kept him awake. Next morning, the watchmen ran in with pale faces and told him that they had seen the man who lived in the lodge climb out the window and into the garden, go to the gate and disappear. The banker went at once with the servants to the lodge and made sure of the flight of his prisoner. To avoid arousing unnecessary talk, he took from the table the writing in which the millions were renounced, and when he got home, locked it up in the fireproof safe.